I thought I had it all figured out. At 35, I was the CEO of a tech startup that had just gone public, living in a mansion in the hills with my wife Sarah, who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine cover. From the outside, we were the power couple everyone envied. But as I've learned the hard way, the most beautiful facades often hide the deepest cracks. Sarah and I met at a charity gala 5 years ago. She was working as an event coordinator, and I was immediately drawn to her intelligence and ambition. She wasn't just another pretty face. She had dreams, goals, and a fierce determination that matched my own. We talked for hours that night about building something meaningful together, about creating a life that would inspire others. The courtship was intense and passionate. Sarah would visit my office late at night, bringing coffee and staying to help me work through business challenges. She understood the pressure I was under, the weight of building something from nothing while managing investors and employees. When she looked at me, I felt like I could conquer the world. Our wedding was featured in 3 magazines. Sarah wore a custom Vera Wang dress that cost more than most people's cars, and I spared no expense on the reception. Everything was perfect, from the hand-picked flowers to the string quartet that played as we danced our first dance. My business partners joked that I was punching above my weight class, but I knew better. Sarah and I were equals, partners in every sense of the word. But somewhere between the honeymoon in Bali and settling into married life, things began to shift. The woman who once stayed up late discussing business strategies started coming home later and later from her yoga classes. The ambitious event coordinator who'd helped me plan investor meetings began to seem distant, distracted, almost like she was living in a different world. I should have paid attention to the signs. The way she'd guard her phone, how she'd suddenly become passionate about meditation retreats, the subtle changes in her wardrobe toward more flowing, spiritual-looking clothes. But I was consumed with work, navigating the complexities of taking my company public, managing a team of 50 employees, and dealing with the constant pressure from investors. Sarah started talking about finding herself and exploring her spiritual side. She'd come home from yoga classes glowing, talking about her instructor Devon and how he was helping her unlock her true potential. I was supportive. Wasn't that what a good husband should be? I even suggested we could fund a meditation center if that's what made her happy. The irony wasn't lost on me that while I was building a technology empire, my wife was diving deeper into a world that seemed to reject everything I stood for. But I loved her, and I thought our differences made us stronger. I thought we were building something beautiful together, even if we were approaching it from different angles. Devon Kumar wasn't what I expected when I finally met him at one of Sarah's studio events. I'd imagined some aging hippie with a man bun and hemp clothing, but Devon was younger than me, built like a professional athlete, with a kind of confident presence that filled a room. He had this way of speaking that made everything sound profound, even when he was just asking if I wanted green tea. "Sarah speaks about you often," he said, clasping my hand in what I later realized was a calculated gesture of false friendship. "She says you're building something remarkable in the tech world. I admire entrepreneurs who follow their dharma." His dharma. Even then, I should have known. Devon had this ability to make ordinary conversations feel like spiritual revelations. He'd talk about alignment and energy and finding your true path, and somehow it all sounded incredibly important. I could see why Sarah was drawn to his classes. The man was magnetic in a way that was both impressive and unsettling. What I didn't realize was that Devon's spiritual wisdom came with a very practical understanding of human nature, particularly when it came to wealthy, unfulfilled women. He'd been teaching yoga for 8 years, and in that time, he developed what I now recognize as a sophisticated system for identifying and pursuing married women who were questioning their life choices. Sarah started attending his private sessions twice a week. She'd come home afterward looking serene and beautiful, talking about breakthrough moments and emotional releases. She described these sessions in detail, how Devon would guide her through challenging poses, how he'd help her work through childhood trauma, how he was teaching her to connect with her authentic self. I was an idiot. I was actually happy that she'd found something that brought her so much joy. I even paid for a weekend retreat at a mountain resort where Devon was teaching. Sarah came back from that retreat transformed, glowing with what she called spiritual awakening. She started meditating for hours, eating only organic food, and talking about how most people were living unconscious lives. The changes weren't just spiritual. Sarah began to question everything about our life together. Why did we need such a big house? Why was I so focused on material success? Wasn't there more to life than building wealth and acquiring possessions? She'd look around our beautiful home, the home she'd helped design, with something that looked like disgust. Devon, meanwhile, was always available for guidance. He'd text Sarah inspirational quotes and invite her to additional workshops. He started a special advanced class that met at sunrise, which Sarah never missed. She'd leave at 5 a.m. and return 3 hours later, radiating the kind of happiness that I hadn't seen in months. I tried to be understanding. I researched yoga philosophy, read books about meditation, even suggested we take a vacation to India to explore ashrams together. But Sarah seemed to view my efforts as proof that I didn't understand what she was going through. She needed space to grow, she said. She needed time to figure out who she really was. The final blow came when I suggested we start trying for children. Sarah looked at me like I'd suggested we poison the water supply. Children, she explained, were a distraction from spiritual development. She wasn't ready to bring souls into this world until she'd completed her own journey of self-discovery. That's when I knew I was losing her. And Devon, with his perfectly timed wisdom and his conveniently available shoulder to lean on, was right there to catch her when she fell. The prenuptial agreement was Sarah's idea. I'll never forget the conversation because it was so completely unexpected that I actually laughed when she first brought it up. We were having dinner at our favorite restaurant, and she was picking at her salmon while I rambled on about some investor meeting. I think we should get a prenup, she said suddenly, cutting through my monologue about quarterly projections. I stopped mid-sentence. A what? A prenuptial agreement. I've been thinking about it, and I want to make sure we're both protected. She was using her serious voice, the one she used when she was planning events and needed to make sure every detail was perfect. This was 6 months before our wedding, when my startup was still burning through cash and my personal net worth was more theoretical than actual. Sarah was making decent money as an event coordinator, but neither of us was wealthy by any stretch. The prenup seemed unnecessary, almost insulting. Protected from what? I asked. We're both broke. Sarah laughed, but there was something calculated in her expression. You won't be broke forever. I can see where this is going with your company. You're going to be very successful, and I want to make sure that when you are, we both know where we stand. The conversation continued over several weeks. Sarah had clearly done her research. She talked about protecting both of our interests, about making sure our marriage was based on love rather than financial considerations. She even consulted with a lawyer, a friend of a friend who specialized in family law. The terms she proposed were generous to me, almost laughably so. In the event of divorce, she would waive any claim to my business interests, stock options, or intellectual property. She would be entitled to half of any real estate we purchased together and would receive modest spousal support for a period of 2 years, provided the marriage lasted at least 5 years. I was touched by her thoughtfulness, by her confidence in my future success, by her desire to prove that she loved me for who I was rather than what I might become. Looking back, I realize I was also flattered by her assumption that I would become wealthy enough to need protection. I want you to know that I'm not marrying you for your money, she said one evening as we reviewed the final draft. I'm marrying you because I love you and because I believe in us. But I also believe in you, and I want to make sure you never have to wonder about my motives. The prenup was signed 3 weeks before our wedding. Sarah insisted on having her own lawyer review it, even though it was heavily skewed in my favor. Her attorney, a sharp woman named Margaret Chen, actually tried to talk her out of several provisions. You're essentially giving up any claim to what could become a very substantial fortune, Margaret warned her during one of the meetings I attended. If his company succeeds the way you both think it will, you could be walking away from millions. Sarah was adamant. This isn't about money, she said. This is about making sure our marriage is built on the right foundation. I should have been suspicious. The woman I'd fallen in love with was ambitious and practical, not the type to make romantic gestures that could cost her millions. But I was so focused on building my company and planning our wedding that I didn't stop to question her motives. The prenup was filed away with our other important documents, and I honestly forgot about it for years. It wasn't until Sarah started talking about spiritual awakening and authentic living that I remembered the conversation we'd had about protection and foundations. By then, of course, it was too late to wonder whether Sarah's foresight had been love or something else entirely. The end came faster than I expected, but slower than I should have seen it coming. Sarah's spiritual journey had been building toward something, and I was too busy managing my company's explosive growth to recognize the warning signs until it was too late. It started with a conversation about authenticity. Sarah had been attending Devon's classes for 8 months, and she'd become fluent in the language of spiritual awakening. She talked about living her truth, about shedding the false self she'd constructed to please others, about the courage required to choose love over security. "I need to tell you something," she said one evening after I'd come home from a particularly brutal day of board meetings. I was exhausted, stressed about a potential acquisition, and looking forward to a quiet evening with my wife. Sarah was sitting in our living room in full lotus position, surrounded by candles and crystals that had become permanent fixtures in our home. She looked beautiful and serene and completely unreachable. "I'm not happy," she continued. "I haven't been happy for a long time, and I've been trying to figure out why." I sat down across from her, trying to shift my attention from spreadsheets and investor calls to whatever crisis my wife was experiencing. "What's wrong? What can we do to fix it?" "That's the problem," she said. "You think everything can be fixed, that happiness is something you can acquire or achieve. But I'm learning that authentic happiness comes from alignment, from living in harmony with your true nature." I knew where this was going. Devon had been teaching her about authentic living and spiritual alignment for months. I'd heard variations of this speech before, usually after she'd spent extended time at the yoga studio. "I've been living a lie," Sarah continued. "I've been trying to be someone I'm not, trying to fit into a life that doesn't reflect who I really am. And it's killing me inside." The conversation lasted 3 hours. Sarah talked about her childhood, about dreams she'd abandoned, about the pressure she felt to be the perfect wife to a successful man. She talked about Devon's teachings on courage and authenticity, about the importance of following your heart even when it's difficult. I tried to be understanding. I suggested therapy, both individual and couples. I offered to take a sabbatical so we could travel together, explore different ways of living. I even suggested we could sell the house and try something completely different. But Sarah had already made her decision. She was in love with Devon, and she was leaving me to explore what she called a more authentic way of being in relationship. "I know this is difficult," she said, "but I have to follow my heart. I have to be true to myself, even if it means losing everything else." The irony was devastating. The woman who'd insisted on a prenup to protect my interests was now walking away from millions because she'd found something more valuable than money. She was choosing love over security, authenticity over comfort, spiritual growth over material success. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. Part of me actually admired her courage, even as it was destroying my life. She was willing to give up everything we'd built together for a chance at something real with Devon. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly civil. Sarah honored the prenup completely, never challenging its terms or asking for more than what we'd agreed to 5 years earlier. She moved out of our house and into a small apartment near the yoga studio. She gave up her event planning business and started teaching meditation classes. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Sarah to realize what she was giving up, for Devon to reveal himself as the opportunistic fraud I was certain he was. But months passed, and Sarah seemed genuinely happy. She posted photos on social media of herself and Devon at retreats and workshops, looking radiant and fulfilled. The final decree was signed on a Tuesday morning in March. Sarah got her modest settlement, I kept my business and our house, and we were officially no longer married. That evening, I sat in our empty home, surrounded by the success I'd worked so hard to build, and wondered if I'd just lost the best thing that had ever happened to me. Devon's true nature revealed itself exactly 18 months after my divorce was finalized. I wasn't looking for information about Sarah and her new life. I'd been trying to move on, dating other women, focusing on expanding my company internationally. But sometimes the universe has a way of delivering justice when you least expect it. The news came from an unexpected source. Margaret Chen, the lawyer who'd originally tried to talk Sarah out of signing the prenup. She called me on a Thursday afternoon, her voice tight with what I quickly recognized as barely contained anger. "You need to know what's happened to Sarah," she said without preamble. "Devon Kumar has been arrested for fraud, and your ex-wife is in serious financial trouble." The story that emerged was both predictable and shocking. Devon had been running a sophisticated long-term con, targeting wealthy women who attended his yoga classes. He'd developed a pattern of spiritual seduction, convincing vulnerable women to leave their husbands and invest in his various enlightenment enterprises. Sarah hadn't just left me for Devon, she'd also invested her entire divorce settlement in his wellness center, his retreat property, and his plan to create a chain of spiritual healing centers across the country. She'd liquidated her retirement accounts, borrowed against her future earnings, and convinced several friends to invest as well. The wellness empire was entirely fictional. Devon had been using new investments to pay returns to earlier investors, classic Ponzi scheme mechanics wrapped in spiritual language. When the scheme collapsed, dozens of women lost everything, and Devon disappeared with approximately $2 million in other people's money. Margaret explained that Sarah had been trying to handle the situation quietly, but Devon's arrest had made everything public. The woman who'd walked away from millions to follow her heart had lost everything to a man who'd never loved her at all. "She's too proud to ask for help," Margaret said. "But I thought you should know." I found Sarah working at a coffee shop in the Arts District, looking older than her years but still beautiful. She was surprised to see me, embarrassed in a way that made my heart ache for her. "I heard about Devon," I said simply. She nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "I suppose you think I got what I deserved." "I think you got taken advantage of by someone who knew exactly how to manipulate your best qualities," I replied. "Your compassion, your willingness to believe in people, your courage to follow your heart." We talked for 2 hours. Sarah explained how Devon had gradually convinced her to invest in his vision, how he'd made her feel like a partner in something meaningful and transformative. She'd believed they were building something beautiful together, creating opportunities for people to heal and grow. "The worst part," she said, "isn't losing the money. It's realizing that nothing we had was real." He was performing a role, saying what he needed to say to get what he wanted. I was just another mark. I wanted to tell her that I'd warned her, that I'd seen through Devon from the beginning. But looking at her face, I realized that she'd already punished herself far more than I ever could. "What will you do now?" I asked. Sarah shrugged. "Start over, I suppose. I'm 33 years old, I have no savings, no home, and no career. But I'm not the first person to rebuild from nothing." That's when I made a decision that surprised us both. I offered Sarah a job at my company, heading up our corporate social responsibility division. Not because I wanted her back, not because I felt sorry for her, but because she had skills and experience that we needed. "I can't accept charity," she said immediately. "It's not charity," I replied. "It's business. You're good at what you do, and we need someone who understands how to create meaningful programs that actually help people." Sarah looked at me for a long moment. "Why would you do this? After everything that happened?" I thought about the question for a while before answering. Because the woman I married was brilliant and capable and ambitious. She made some mistakes, but that doesn't erase who she is. And honestly, because I need someone who understands the difference between authentic purpose and spiritual manipulation. The prenup that had protected my assets also protected Sarah's pride. She couldn't claim she'd been foolish to leave wealth behind, because she'd never had a legal right to it anyway. She'd made her choices freely, and now she was free to make different ones. 6 months later, Sarah's program has become one of the most successful corporate initiatives in our company's history. She's rebuilt her life, her confidence, and her career. We're not getting back together. Too much has happened for that, but we found a way to respect each other again. And Devon? He's serving 5 years in federal prison, where I imagine he's discovered that authentic spiritual practice doesn't require expensive retreats or vulnerable women's life savings. Sometimes the universe provides its own form of enlightenment. The prenup that once seemed like a romantic gesture turned out to be the smartest decision either of us ever made. It protected my assets, yes, but more importantly, it protected Sarah's dignity. When she lost everything to Devon's lies, she didn't lose the right to rebuild on her own terms. That, it turns out, was worth more than any amount of money we could have fought over.